Nimbula and welcome again to the JustPeace TALANOA BURE at COVID-19, a platform that brings together women, men and youth leaders engaging at the forefront of disasters and at COVID-19. At time like this, where Fiji, the Pacific region, and the world are facing major challenges as the effect of the pandemic. At the same time, we come together, rising from the barriers of isolations to continue the TALANOA, talking to each other, share our values and ways of doing that we treasure, and how at the same time, climate change and COVID-19 and the issues of violence against women and gender-based violence continues to be a barrier and a rising concern in the current situation. How do we manage and work around this as a multicultural society in Fiji and the Pacific? Let us listen more to the TALANOA. Joining us at the BURE panel today is Ms. Alisi Waqainabete from the Youth Network Methodist Church Fiji and Iowane Mow, a Catholic church leader based at Narrated Parish, with our very own host, Paulo Baleinakorodawa, the Program Director, Transcend Oceania.
Welcome to Transcend Oceania's JustPeace TALANOA BURE at COVID-19, a platform that brings together community representatives, leaders, women and youth to share stories and priorities that holds value to them, to their people and their vanua. Through their experiences, there are also lessons learned. There are recommendations and possible solutions and plans to the current situation. Here with me in this TALANOA and in this episode, Alisi Waqainabete, representing the Methodist Church Youth Network, and Iowane Mow, representing the youths of the Catholic parish of the Our Lady of Fatima in Narrated. Welcome, Alisi, and welcome, Iowane. So let's begin the TALANOA by talking about the things that you value most in your cultures. I understand you're both from the Itauke community, but for you as a woman, Alisi, what are some of the things that you think you value most in your culture?
One of the things I see as an important aspect of my culture is the act of vetalevi. When you constantly just check in on somebody else, just check up on how they're doing. This helps in just finding out what's an update on your community, on who's sick, who's not sick, and it helps people to just get more help. So that's one of the things I value the most, because I see it as an important aspect for me personally, especially with social work. I've learned that my involvement in social work has been from that act alone.
So it's being concerned about people around you, what's happening to them, about their lives and all that in every single day.
So there are other important aspects of my culture that contribute to it, but I think that act of vetalevi is one of the most important.
Okay.
Important.
Very good. Thank you, Alisi. Let's turn to you, Iowane. I know you have your surname actually tells me that while you look indigenous, you might have other mix in your heritage. So in terms of your culture, and you can talk about whichever culture you are most comfortable with, what in that culture, what are some of the things that you value most for you as a young person?
Come from a mixed culture, we just try to incorporate what suits us. For us, we just take what I value the most is communal based approach. Because for me, that's where I get to meet my relatives. I get to make memories. In this pandemic, I've seen it in the community, how we take that approach and we look out for other community members, those who are not, how would you say, put it, those who need help.
Need help?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you were saying that aspect of communal living is something that you value at all times, when times are good or when you have challenges and difficulties like what you are currently facing in the pandemic. Can you just give me some examples of how that is practically shown in this time of the pandemic?
So when we know that someone in the community is needing food or whatever they need, we just go and visit them. We ask them on how they're doing, and then we just provide whatever we can.
Even though there's the challenges of restrictions of movement and all that, for you and in your community, because you value communal living, despite all these restrictions, you want to reach out to people who are needing help. Is that what you're trying to say, Iowane? Okay, let's move back to you, Alisi. I find that really interesting, the fact that you are concerned about people who live around you, whether they are related to you, whether they are not, you're concerned about them. Why is this value so important to you as a young woman in your culture?
I've always, when you're growing up in a culture as conservative as the Itoke culture, you begin to understand that that's the only way you will know how somebody else is when you ask or you go to them and you just start a conversation, just ask how their day is. And it ends up where they start to tell you that, we don't have food, we need help. And because in our culture, the conservative strength in our culture is very strong for Itoke culture. You don't ask for help. And so
you just go.
Yeah. And so the Vita Levi, for me, I personally think it helps because you are asking them.
Right. So how do you feel? How do you feel when you don't do that, when you know that people are needing help and then you don't go?
It actually takes me back a few steps to just process that I can't help someone who needs help. But there's a lot of peace that comes with just being there for somebody else that needs it.
And I see the thing that you value in your culture, the communal living, connecting very well to what you're talking about, Alisi. So for both of you, and any of you can answer this, I ask you how important it is for you to be doing that continuously. Yeah? And for you, Iowane, we've been talking about whether the times are okay or the times are not okay, you still go. Even now, where there's a lot of restrictions of movement, you still try to reach out to those who are around you because they might be needing help. So how does it make you feel, Iowane, when you know that somebody is needing help? You were there beside them, or you know that they need help, but you are not taking the step to reach out to them. How does that make you feel?
I kind of feel guilty because you're living in like a sort of comfortable life, and there are people suffering, and then you can't reach out to help it.
Okay, so that's really good, huh? And so it's really very important for both of you, and I understand you both are young people, to be reaching out, to be concerned about people, and particularly now when there's a lot of challenges that's been brought about by COVID-19 pandemic. You're watching Transcend Oceania's TALANOA at COVID-19. Don't leave us. Please join us after this break. Welcome back. And joining us in the TALANOA in this episode are Alisi Waqainabete, representing the Methodist Church Youth Network, and Iowane Mow, representing the Catholic youths of the Our Lady of Fatima Parish in Nandera. And in this segment, we will want to continue the TALANOA for both Alisi and Iowane to talk to us about priority issues for you now. And I understand, Alisi, you're representing the Methodist Church Youth Network, but you are also here as a young woman, and you're here as a young woman from the Itauke community. Iowane, you have mentioned before that you're from mixed ethnicity, but you have priority issues that you can also talk about. So let's start with you, Alisi. What are some of the key or the priority issues for you as a young woman representing the Methodist Church Youth Network?
Thank you. One of the key issues that I've noticed growing up within the Methodist Church is domestic violence or gender-based violence. We don't speak about it, not enough at least, and I think the lack of awareness or involvement of to the church, for them to just make it a pulpit thing, talk more about how much it affects children, how much trauma it brings to the family. So I've noticed that there's so much more issues that we need to address, but I feel like as a young woman, as an Itauke woman, I still need to address gender-based violence and how important it is to just eradicate the act altogether.
Earlier on, when you started talking about this issue, you alluded to the fact that we do not talk about these things. Why? Why do we not talk about it?
In my own opinion, when we started this our own religious groups, we've associated our culture into it to make it more acceptable towards our own people. And with this comes the cultural taboos that we don't talk about. So we've associated it with our churches, with our religions. Therefore, we don't talk about it at all. So when we come to the church and we talk about, love, evangelism, and all these things, which is great, but we're still not addressing the key issue is we need to address gender-based violence. It needs to stop. So, yeah.
So when a woman is being bashed in the neighborhood, and you were there, you just remain silent about it. You don't talk about it. Because of this taboo thing that you talked about earlier.
It's very easy for people to say, oh, that's their business. That's their business, that's their family's issue. It's not everyone's. We just mind our own business. But it's everyone's business. That's somebody's life. So I still feel the church, and not just the church, the whole country, our Pacific culture needs to eradicate this act.
But it's so contradictory to what you mentioned earlier on in the segment before, Alisi. You said, the Vela Kovi thing, you are concerned, you want to know what's happening in there. But when somebody is being hit, when a woman is being hit, you remain silent about it. It's so contradictory.
That's one of the things. That's one of the reasons why I stated Aveta Levi earlier, when you Vela Kovi and you check in on somebody else, is because when you're checking in on somebody else and that is happening in that house, you don't talk about it. Why are you not talking about it, but you're talking about how they don't have food, how you want to help them for other things? Why don't you help them in this situation?
There's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and there's a lot of answers that we need to search to be able to understand why don't you talk about these things? And you talk about the lack of food, the lack of other things, but you're not talking about this, the violence that's happening in the family. I'll come back to you, Alisi, because it's really very interesting, that conversation. Iowane, now you've talked about the communal living and all that, and the challenges that this pandemic has been bringing to that lifestyle, that type of living that we have. What are some of the priority issues, the current issues that you face as a young person in your community, in your church? Could you talk about those issues to us?
Thank you, Paulo. For me, it's just a pandemic. With this pandemic, there's like all the hidden problems we have starting to surface. We never talk about gender violence, but when we first had the lockdown in April, there was a high case in domestic violence, and I really question why we don't report on those issues, because these are just the reported issues. What about those that are not reported, as Alisi had mentioned? Second one is mental health. I believe it affects us all. As a young person, I've had like sometimes the past couple of months it's been tough, because I'm used to going out, and then you just told to isolate. It's really tough, sir.
So you talk about two very important issues there, arising out of the current situation in terms of the pandemic. And I heard you earlier on talk about the hidden issues are now being surfaced, and you then alluded to the high rate of gender-based violence. Why do you think it's happening, it's rising at this time?
Lockdown, now there's not a lot of people at work, so if violence is just arising because of I think probably tension or anger. Well, it could be other reasons, but
okay, so there could be many reasons why there's a high rate of violence at this time, from your perspective as a young man. We will leave it there for now, and we will come back in the next episode to maybe talk a little bit more about this and then look at lessons learned and recommendations. You are watching Transcend Oceania's JustPeace TALANOA BURE at COVID-19. Join us after this break. Welcome back to this episode, and again we are being joined by Alisi Waqainabete from the Methodist Youth Network and Iowane Mow from the Catholic Youth of the Our Lady of Fatima Parish in Nandera. And so we want in this segment to move the conversation forward to talk about, after all this experience, the things that you've talked about in segment 1, which are the things that you value most in your culture, and in segment 2 you talked about what are the key priority issues for you now. So for this segment, I will invite you to talk about what lessons have you learned so far regarding the values, regarding your experiences with those issues, and what are some recommendations that you would like to put forward for both of you, because it sounds like you both represent churches, the recommendations you want to put forward for the churches, recommendations you want to put forward for the young people's groups that you both represent. So let's begin with you, Alisi. The values that you hold dear in your culture, the linking that to the priority issues, which for you is domestic violence, and now for you as a young person, what have you learned so far? What are the lessons learned for you, and what are recommendations that you want to put forward?
Right. what I've learned from doing social work and being engaged in issues such as domestic violence. One of the things I've learned is that it needs to be addressed. There needs to be more awareness on it. I salute the Fiji Women's Rights Crisis Center for reaching out and doing workshops and trying to get to everyone. And there are other NGOs, women NGOs, that are actually just going to grassroots level to try and send the message across. I would have appreciated it more if it came from the churches itself. That's one of the things I would have appreciated. And another thing is male champions for these issues. We have seen so many women, young women champions and trans champions for for gender-based violence, but we hardly have male champions for it. And that's one of the things that's very important, because if I'm trying to reach out, if I'm a male, for example, if I'm a male and I'm trying to reach out to another male, just talking about it gets the work done. But if I'm a female and he already undermines me, he won't hear me. So, it's very important to have male champions for issues such as such. Yeah.
So the lesson for you is we can no longer be silent about domestic violence. We've got to start talking about it. We've got to start responding to it. And thanking all those who have been part of this, the women's movement in Fiji and others, but you are wanting the churches to
be more involved in addressing gender-based violence. Yeah.
Thank you, Alisi. Iowane, what lessons have you learned so far? You talked about communal living, and then you went on to talk about the pandemic. There's lots of things that we are learning now, including the spike in gender-based violence. What have you learned so far, and what are some recommendations you want to put forward for you, to your youth group, to the church, to everybody?
Firstly, I agree with Alisi. We need male champs to advocate against the violence against women, because for too long it's just been the women advocating. It's about time that men stand up, take the stand against violence. Secondly, in terms of mental health, in Fiji, like whenever somebody is facing mental health issues, we kind of degrade that person, and make fun of it. But it's not a laughing matter. It's time that we take it seriously, because I've learned that some people, recently I had a friend who had a serious mental issue, and he did, he's in a lot of, he's in the hospital right now. So I feel that whenever somebody reaches out regarding mental health issues, we should not take it lightly and try and help that person. That's about it for me.
Thank you. So you talked about two things. One is the mental health issue that you've just talked about, that we cannot remain silent anymore. Particularly men need to stand up to speak against gender-based violence and violence against women and girls. Okay, so it sounds like there's a dialogue here. We are talking about the same things in different ways, but your recommendations are good. For you, Alisi, it's how can the churches play an active role in ending domestic violence? And that's a key question. That's a critical question that we need to ask in the churches. And for you, what are some of the things that you think the churches can do?
The MYF Matavitokania for the youths in the Methodist Church have something called the Four Corners, where we practice during our youth sessions. And these things come with different themes, where you have Sokolo worship, and you have recreation. So for different days you'll have those different. And I feel these Four Corners need to involve more of the social issues that we're facing. Whereas we can have people come and speak on, we are doing that right now. We have people coming to speak on just helping our young people with, scholarship applications, or people who are coming to speak on land rights and things like that, which are very important. But I feel there still needs to be more on gender-based violence.
So it's more. It's okay to be talking about your faith, the spiritual stuff, theology, and all that. But how do we weave in and begin to start talk about critical issues, social issues? As you say, domestic violence is one of the key things that you need to talk about. Iowane, what are some of the things that you think that church can do, the Catholic Church, and particularly in your parish, to address gender-based violence and to address mental health issues?
Okay, thank you, Paulo. For gender-based violence, I think that we should have men be the voice of violence against women. And for mental health, I think if they could provide pastoral counseling, just to reach out and help, because in this pandemic, I believe that we will need a lot of counseling.
So there's a lot of men and women who want to talk, but who to talk to may not be available out there. So that's really good. You've talked about very, very critical things in this dialogue. Unfortunately, time has caught up with us. So I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of Transcend Oceania to thank you both for coming along to be part of this dialogue. And thank you, viewers, for joining us in this episode.
As we conclude our Just Peace TALANOA BURE at COVID-19, we are reminded once again to enable people living just peace and nonviolence in Oceania, the Pacific, and here in Fiji. We need to be both mindful and maintain safety protocol. Mask up, home isolation may be tough. At the same time, the need for health care, leaving no one behind, for inclusive peace, security, safety with dignity, amidst the changes and transitions we are going through. I'm Adi Vasulevu at Transcend Oceania. Join us at the same time next week.